My girlfriend's coworker always commented on her looks. She brushed it off, saying, "It's just innocent." But when I borrowed her phone to take a picture, I saw their texts, heart emojis, late night, miss you, messages. My stomach turned. That night, I casually asked, "Does he know you have a boyfriend?" She laughed, "Of course." I pulled out my phone, "Then why did he just ask you on a date?" Her face dropped as I showed her the screenshot. I never thought I'd be in this situation. You hear about it happening to other people. You read the stories, shake your head, and think, that could never be me. But life has a way of proving you wrong in the worst possible way. Sophie and I had been together for 4 years. We lived in a small but comfortable one-bedroom apartment in Lakeview, Chicago. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. I worked in IT, handling network security and fixing the same 5 problems over and over. Sophie worked in marketing at a mid-sized firm downtown. We met through mutual friends, hit it off instantly, and that was it. She was smart, funny, and had this way of making people feel comfortable around her. I never had a reason to doubt her. Not until him. Nathan. Her coworker. I heard his name for the first time about a year ago. Sophie would come home and tell me about her day, the way couples do. At first, he was just a guy in the office. Someone who made meetings less boring. Someone who cracked jokes when things got stressful. Then, I started hearing about him more often. Nathan said the funniest thing today. Nathan and I grabbed coffee before the meeting. Nathan loves that show too. It was subtle, easy to ignore. Just another name in her stories. But something about the way she talked about him, it felt different. I'm not the jealous type. I've never been the guy who goes through his girlfriend's phone or questions her about who she's talking to. But after a while, I started noticing small things. Like the way she'd smile at her phone more often. The way she'd get quiet before answering a text. I told myself I was overthinking. She wasn't hiding her phone. She wasn't sneaking around. She wasn't acting different toward me. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. A few months ago, we were at Navy Pier. It was one of those perfect Chicago nights, warm but not too humid, a slight breeze coming off the lake. Sophie wanted a picture, so she handed me her phone. And right as I was about to snap the shot, a notification popped up. Yellow heart miss you. From Nathan. My stomach dropped. I froze, the phone still in my hand. Sophie was smiling at the camera, waiting for me to take the picture, completely unaware that everything was changing in that moment. I took the picture. I handed the phone back to her. And I said nothing. Not because I didn't want to. But because my mind was racing. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I misread it. Maybe. The entire night, I felt like I was watching her through glass. Like I was suddenly an outsider in my own relationship. She laughed, held my hand, leaned her head on my shoulder. Like nothing had happened. I barely slept that night. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. I'd never done it before. Never even thought about it. It felt wrong. Like breaking into someone's house. But I needed to know. The first thing I saw was their chat. Nathan, wish you were here. Sophie, you're the worst. I'd get in trouble winking face Nathan, would it really be that bad? Sophie, maybe not. My hands went cold. I scrolled up. You looked so good today. I can't stop thinking about our conversation last night. You always make my day better. She was laughing at his jokes. Sending flirty emojis. Responding late at night. I put the phone down. Stared at the ceiling. I wasn't even angry at first. Just numb. That night, we were lying in bed. She was scrolling through TikTok, completely relaxed. Like everything was normal. I turned to her and asked, "Does Nathan know you have a boyfriend?" She laughed. Laughed. Of course. I pulled out my phone, opened the picture I took of her screen, and turned it toward her. Then why did he just ask you on a date? Her face dropped. She blinked, like her brain was catching up to what was happening. Then she looked at her phone. Then back at me. Silence. I could hear the hum of the ceiling fan. The muffled sounds of a car passing outside. I didn't look away. Sophie. My voice was even. Too even. What's going on? She sat up. It's not what you think. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's the best you've got? She swallowed hard. I mean, it's not serious. I stared at her. Not serious? She shifted, tucking her legs under herself. I mean, I guess I like the attention sometimes. But I would never. I waited. She hesitated. That was all I needed to know. What exactly do you call this? I gestured to her phone. She exhaled. It's just texts. I shook my head. If I sent messages like this to another girl, would it be just texts? She looked away. I don't know. The worst part? She wasn't even denying it. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for forgiveness. She was just sitting there, hands clasped together, breathing hard like she'd been caught sneaking in past curfew. I ran a hand down my face. Sophie. Tell me the truth. Did you go out with him? No, she said it immediately. I swear. I wanted to believe her. But I wasn't sure if I did. Would you have? That pause. That damn pause. She didn't answer right away. She opened her mouth. Closed it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. That was my answer. I sat there, staring at her, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. The pause had already told me everything I needed to know. I felt my stomach twist. My chest was tight, like I had been holding my breath for too long. I got up. I needed space, air, anything but this. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Wait, she said quickly. I don't want to fight. I let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. That's convenient. She ran a hand through her hair, looking down at the bed. I didn't think it would turn into this. Into what, Sophie? My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Something you'd have to explain. She flinched. I grabbed my jacket. I'm going for a walk. She didn't try to stop me. Chicago at night is different. It's quieter, but not in a peaceful way. More like a waiting kind of quiet, like the city is holding its breath. I walked with no real direction, just moving because stopping meant thinking, and I couldn't think. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. Sophie, please come back. Let's talk. I turned the screen off. Kept walking. My mind kept looping back to that pause. That damn pause. If she had just said no. If she had answered right away, maybe I could have convinced myself this was all a misunderstanding. But she didn't. And I couldn't. I found myself at the 24-hour diner on Clark Street, the one we used to go to after late-night movies. I sat in the back, ordered coffee I didn't want, and stared at my hands. Then I made a mistake. I opened Instagram. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I wanted to see if she had posted anything. Maybe I was hoping to find a reason to believe she wasn't lying. But the first thing I saw was Nathan's profile. His latest post was from a few hours ago. A picture of a drink. Some dimly lit bar. The caption read, "Some nights just hit different." And then I saw it. A comment. From Sophie. Sophie, haha, stop smirking face. My stomach dropped. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't worried about what just happened between us. She was sitting on her phone, flirting with him. I stared at the screen, my hand tightening around the coffee cup. She didn't think I would see this. She didn't think I would check. Or worse, she didn't care if I did. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe an hour. The coffee had gone cold. My phone buzzed again. Sophie, please. Just come home. Home. That word felt different now. I exhaled slowly and typed out a reply. Me, are you with him right now? 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Started again. Sophie, what? No. I'm at home. Me, then why are you commenting on his post? Nothing. The dots didn't come back. I leaned back in my seat, staring at the ceiling. She was caught, and she knew it. I flagged the waitress, paid for my coffee, and walked out into the night. I wasn't going home. Not yet. I ended up at my friend Daniel's apartment in Wicker Park. He opened the door, bleary-eyed, scratching his head. Dude, he mumbled, stepping aside. It's 2 a.m. I walked past him and sat on his couch. I think Sophie is cheating on me. That woke him up fast. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, tossed one to me, and sat down. What happened? I told him everything. The texts. The pause. The Instagram comment. When I was done, he let out a low whistle. Man, he shook his head. That's rough. I took a long sip of beer. What would you do? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged. Depends. Do you think she actually did something? Or do you think she wants to? That question hit different. Because deep down, I knew. Even if she hadn't done anything yet, she wanted to. Maybe she was waiting for the right moment. Maybe she was telling herself that since she hadn't crossed the line, it wasn't really wrong. Maybe she was hoping I wouldn't find out. I set my beer down. I can't go back. Daniel nodded. Then don't. The next morning, I woke up on Daniel's couch to my phone ringing. Sophie. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. And again. Then a text. Sophie, where are you? I stared at the screen. She wasn't sorry. She was scared. She knew she messed up. She knew she had pushed too far. And she knew I might not come back this time. I exhaled. This wasn't over. Not yet. I let her call go to voicemail. Then I turned my phone over and stared at the ceiling. Daniel walked into the living room, stretching. She called you? I nodded. He sat down and cracked open an energy drink. You gonna answer? I didn't respond right away. My gut was telling me not to, but there was another part of me, the part that had spent 4 years building a life with her, that still wanted answers. After a long moment, I picked up my phone and called her back. She answered on the first ring. Where are you? Her voice sounded different. Tired. Stressed. Maybe even guilty. Does it matter? I said flatly. She sighed. Come home. Please. Let's talk. I wanted to tell her there was nothing to talk about, but instead, I said, why did you comment on his post? Silence. Sophie. She inhaled sharply. I don't know. Yes, you do, I shot back. You just didn't think I'd see it. She didn't deny it. Didn't even try. I leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. Are you with him? No, she said immediately. I'm at home. I heard something in the background. A soft thud, like a door closing. I froze. Sophie, I said carefully. Are you alone? She was silent for a second too long. Then I heard a muffled voice, too low to make out the words, but definitely someone else. My stomach dropped. I clenched my jaw. Who is that? She stopped herself. It's just Ellie. Ellie. One of her coworkers. The one she never mentioned hanging out with outside of work. I wasn't buying it. You swear? Yes, she said quickly. Too quickly. Can we just talk in person? I took a slow breath, staring at the floor. You're lying to me. No, I'm not. But I heard it in her voice. That nervous edge. The same way she had hesitated last night. I wasn't stupid. If Nathan wasn't there, why did she sound so panicked? Why was she so desperate for me to come home before I started asking more questions? I let the silence stretch. Then, I hung up. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Dude. I rubbed my hands over my face. Yeah. He finished his drink and tossed the can in the trash. You gonna go over there? I didn't know what I was planning to do until I was already grabbing my keys. I pulled up to our apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I sat there for a minute, watching the window. The lights were on. No movement. Then, as I was about to get out, the front door to the building opened. Nathan walked out. I felt my heart hammer in my chest. My vision tunneled. He wasn't running. He wasn't trying to sneak away. He walked out like he belonged there. Like this wasn't the first time. Like he knew he didn't have to hide anymore. I didn't even think. I got out of the car. Nathan. My voice came out steady, but my hands were shaking. He turned, surprised to see me. Then his face shifted, his mouth twitched, like he was trying to figure out if he should act guilty or just go with the truth. He settled on cocky. Hey, man. I clenched my fists. What are you doing here? He sighed, shoving his hands in his pockets. Look, I don't want to fight. I took a slow step closer. Then start talking. He shifted his weight. We were just hanging out. She needed someone to talk to. I let out a bitter laugh. Right. And you just happened to be the guy she called. His jaw tightened. I didn't force her to. That sentence hit me like a slap to the face. I stared at him, everything clicking into place. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't even pretending like he thought this was wrong. Because to him, it wasn't. To him, this wasn't my relationship falling apart. To him, this was already over. My breathing was slow, controlled. How long? He hesitated, then shrugged. Depends on what you count. I saw red. Before I could stop myself, my fist connected with his jaw. He stumbled back, caught off guard, eyes wide for half a second. Then his expression hardened. He wiped his lip, looking at the blood on his fingers. Then he grinned. And that's when Sophie opened the door. Her eyes darted between us. Her face was pale. Nathan, go, she said sharply. He rolled his eyes. Whatever. He shot me one last smirk before walking off. I turned to Sophie, chest rising and falling too fast. She looked at me. And for the first time, I saw it. Not guilt. Not regret. Relief. Like a choice had just been made. And I wasn't the one she chose. Sophie stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes locked onto mine. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scrambling for an excuse. She was just waiting. Like she knew what was coming and had already accepted it. That hurt more than anything else. I stepped closer, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Say it. My voice was low, but the anger was there, vibrating under my skin. Say what I already know. She swallowed hard. I don't, say it. I exploded, my voice echoing off the brick walls of our apartment complex. She flinched. And then, she did. I have feelings for him. It hit me like a truck. Not just because she admitted it. But because she said it so plainly. No hesitation. No stammering. No shame. I let out a hollow laugh, running a hand through my hair. Wow. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You really don't even feel bad, do you? She blinked rapidly, like she was holding back tears. But they weren't for me. Sophie, I continued, my throat tight, have you been with him? Silence. She looked away. That was my answer. I turned, taking a step back, trying to get air. Trying to get away. Wait, she reached for me, but I pulled back like her touch would burn me. Don't, I said, my voice sharp. You don't get to do that. You don't get to pretend like you care now. She sucked in a breath. I do care. I scoffed. Yeah. Funny way of showing it. Her eyes flashed with frustration. You don't understand, then explain it, I cut in. Explain how you let him get close. Explain how you let yourself want him. Her mouth opened. But no words came. Because there was no explanation that wouldn't make her the villain in this story. She turned away, pressing the heels of her hands to her eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed, but it was bitter, sharp. That's the thing, Sophie. It didn't just happen. You let it. Every text, every late-night conversation, every secret you kept from me, that was a choice. She wiped her eyes, her breath shaky. I didn't plan to hurt you. But you did. I exhaled hard, staring up at the night sky, my chest heavy. And the worst part? You didn't even care enough to stop yourself. She didn't say anything. Because she knew I was right. And maybe, deep down, she was relieved I had figured it out so she wouldn't have to keep pretending. The door to the building opened again, and suddenly, we weren't alone. Ellie. Sophie's coworker. She looked between us, her lips slightly parted like she had just walked into a crime scene. Sophie turned to her quickly. Ellie, go inside. But Ellie didn't move. She looked at me instead. And then, she said something that shattered whatever was left. I told you this would happen. Sophie stiffened. Ellie, I turned to Ellie slowly, my pulse hammering. What do you mean? Ellie looked tired. Annoyed, even. Like she was sick of the lies, too. She's been lying to you for months. She folded her arms, shaking her head. You weren't supposed to find out like this, but, she sighed. Honestly? You deserved the truth a long time ago. Sophie turned red. Ellie, shut up. Ellie ignored her. They've been sneaking around. After work. Lunch breaks. Sometimes even when you were home, she was texting him. Something inside me cracked. I turned to Sophie. Is that true? She said nothing. Ellie scoffed. She's not gonna say it, but yeah. It's true. I stared at Sophie, my vision tunneling. You were texting him while I was sitting right next to you. Still nothing. And that silence, was worse than if she had just screamed it in my face. I let out a long, slow breath. I can't believe you. She blinked hard. No, I said, shaking my head. No. You don't get to say anything else. She swallowed. Please don't do this, I didn't do anything, Sophie. My voice was raw. You did this. She flinched like I had struck her. Ellie exhaled through her nose, looking away. I'm sorry you had to find out like this, man. I nodded stiffly. Yeah. Me too. Then I turned and walked away. I don't remember getting back to Daniel's place. I just remember sitting on his couch, staring at the floor, my body feeling like it wasn't even mine. Daniel didn't say anything. Just handed me a beer and sat next to me in silence. I finally spoke. She's been with him for months. Daniel exhaled. I'm sorry, man. I let out a bitter laugh. She didn't even try to lie at the end. She didn't have to, Daniel muttered. You already knew. I stared at the label on my beer, my thoughts a tangled mess. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do now. Daniel took a sip of his drink. You do know. And the thing is, he was right. I knew exactly what I had to do. The next morning, I went back to the apartment, but not to talk. Not to listen to any more excuses. I packed my things. Sophie tried to stop me. She cried. She begged. She swore she never meant for it to happen. I didn't say much. Because at the end of the day, I wasn't leaving because she cheated. I was leaving because she didn't love me enough to stop herself. She wasn't sorry she hurt me. She was sorry she got caught. I walked out the door without looking back. It's been 6 months. I got my own place. Focused on work. Reconnected with old friends. Sophie reached out a few times. I never answered. Then, last week, I saw it. A picture. Sophie and Nathan. Together. I stared at it for a long time. And you know what? I didn't feel anything. No anger. No sadness. Just, relief. Because I finally understood. She wasn't mine to lose. She was already gone.